Documentaries are about the people that you meet and the stories you can tell. Stories of tragedy, laughter, hope and desperation, across faraway lands or right here in your own backyard. This podcast brings these stories to you, the listener, so that you can experience the adventures of documentary filmmaking in audio form while embarking on daily adventures of your own. Welcome to Barefoot Media's Stories Within Stories podcast with your host, Simon Holland. Pippa Hurst is the founder of Design Frio, a collective that promotes and celebrates design in the port city of Fremantle, Western Australia. To the uninitiated, design seems to be the art of, hey wait, let's have a think about this before we proceed. Welcome to the show, Pippa.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you very much for having me.
So tell us, just in your own words, what's the definition of design?
Design. Well, design is when humans are trying to solve a problem by making something. I guess that's a simple way to put it. That's everything from objects, things that we make, things that we can hold, buildings, things that we can see. But design is also about systems and user experience, service, anything that requires a problem being solved and requires humans to actually put their mind to thinking about how they're going to do that the best way possible.
So listening to that definition, that sort of tells me that you're walking around the world thinking about the world, observing the world differently to most people.
Well, maybe. I think everyone sees the world their own way. There was a great thing that I read once where if you walk into a room, if you're an artist, you see the art, and if you walk into a room and you're alcoholic, you see the bottles. So I guess I am, in the sense that, aesthetics is very important to me. Design of things that actually physically exist is often linked to aesthetics and how things look. But the really important thing about design is how things function. So, a definition of good design is how well something does its job. So if you see something at home, if you're using a potato peeler and it doesn't work very well, that's not very good design. But when something works perfectly, you feel fabulous. Often just the satisfaction that comes out of something that really does its job well is great. And you do see that, don't you, on Instagram posts and things, just the satisfaction of something working.
Or when you upgrade a whippersnipper and you're like, right. I can't believe I hacked away with that stupid thing for
I know. Yeah. It was like my fridge. I got a new fridge and suddenly all my food lasted 3 times as long. I'm like, oh, that old fridge was really bad. So a lot of design is about things doing their job well. A lot of bad design is about things that we don't need. There's a big sustainability story in design. Do you need something? Are we making things that we don't need? We know that there's just so much stuff in the world. And a lot of it is unnecessary. One product that I particularly hate is when I go into the supermarket and you see that pancake mix that comes in a shake container.
Oh, yeah, like a milk bottle thing.
Yeah, and it's only half full. So half the plastic in that product is wrapping air. Like, how hard is it to just get the stuff and put it in a container that you've already got and add a bit of whatever it is? That is really, really bad design. It's one of my most hated things, that particular item.
You see little things like individually wrapped bananas and things like that. And it's just like, what the? Yeah.
Yeah.
Wastage.
Products designed to keep a tomato fresh in the fridge. Well, I think you can probably keep your tomato in something you've already got. You don't need to buy something just to cover your tomato or your avocado.
Yeah.
So that is a really important thing about design. And when we're thinking, is something a piece of good design? Well, do we need it? Is it doing what it does well? Is it functional? What's it made of? Plastic is a big problem. We know that. So one of the conversations we're having in the coming design festival is called What is Good Design? We're going to talk a lot about that because the definition of good design, obviously there's some principles that are timeless, and there's this idea of usefulness and beauty and appropriateness that should always apply, but then there's sustainability, climate crisis, all these things that we're dealing with now, and things like working with Indigenous cultures and thinking about how the stories that we tell through the things that we make, what do they represent? Sometimes things are only designed by men for men. Who's designing it? Who's deciding whether it's good or not? And what exists and what doesn't exist. So there's so many layers to it, and I find it endlessly fascinating.
And what sort of pathway did you go down? You know, when, first of all, what was the catalyst? Like, was there a watershed moment where you just went, oh my God, this is what I need to do?
Well, I do remember when I was, a child, when you used to go to the movies before the main film started, there used to be a short, and it would have been in the 70s. There was a film called One Designer, Two Designer, and it was an animated film. They did actually used to talk quite a lot about design, I think, in the 70s. There used to be a show on television. I can't remember. I think it was called The Inventors, where they used to come on and talk about products and things. But this animation was talking about design, and it said if you've got a teacup and you can't fit your fingers through the handle, or the handle's in the wrong spot, you're going to spill your tea and burn yourself. And that was my aha moment when I suddenly connected design to function. And I think that was the thing that really engaged me. And so that's my aha moment that I always look back to. My father was an architect, so we were always around design and architecture. And then I studied graphic design. So that was what I did originally. My career, I went to London and worked in publishing. I had a break for a while. And then I came back and worked in architecture practices. So I've worked sort of design adjacent, even if I haven't been on the tools. So, yeah, it's a bit of a rambling story, but that's kind of my journey.
Yeah, but and was your career something that kind of just led you through opportunity, or something that you kind of pointed in the direction and crafted your kind of way through?
I think a bit of both. I think, I loved my graphic design career early in my career, and then publishing was great. I mean, doing publishing in London, obviously it wasn't something you could ever really do in Perth. I was in Sydney book publishing, that's right. But then while I was there, they invented CD-ROMs. And so then I started working in multimedia, and I did a postgrad at Central St Martin's in multimedia. Yeah. And obviously that kind of, the technology keeps moving. So if you're not staying in that area, you kind of get left behind, I guess. Yeah. Then I came back to Australia and worked, I guess it was a sort of technology company, multimedia sort of company at the time. And that was when we started working with internet and web and that sort of thing. Then I took a long break when I had my kids and really became very much involved in the community. And I found that to be very educational as well, just learning. We ran events and I did fundraising and just working with people a lot. I think that was what I got out of that time in my life, just understanding communities and people. And then when my kids were a bit older, I went back to work and then worked in an architecture practice. And then my career just kind of moved more towards this kind of communications and marketing and writing. But then I started Design Frio in 2020 because I think it's really storytelling that is my thing really at the end of the day, and telling the stories about design and the value of design and promoting that value of design, because a lot of the time people think that design is something that's expensive or elitist or for rich people, or it's not really about them. But it's so important and it can make such a difference. When we design buildings properly and cities properly and objects properly, it makes a difference to people's lives. And so telling those stories, I guess, is where I've kind of ended up now.
Is it hard to get people on the same page for design? You're talking to councils and they want it to look like this, and you're talking to the guy who's spending the money wants it to look like that, and then the user, the kids that are playing in the playground. Is it hard to sew all those things together to get a functional result?
Well, it is. Everyone's reading from a different piece of paper, aren't they? Their outcome and what they want to get out of it is different. So I guess it's about unpicking that and working out what are we trying to achieve, and so how can we get there and make everyone kind of get something out of it, get what they want out of it. Because you're always working with budgets and things that are outside of people's control. Certainly we know that at present with the housing crisis and construction is just ridiculously expensive. Well, what do we do about that? We need to build more houses, but people need to be able to afford them. So it's a bit of a shifting set of circumstances, and every time you've got to come to the table and think, what are we trying to achieve here? So it is difficult, and some people don't really value design. Even aesthetics, it's such a subjective thing, isn't it? Some of us...
Like fake grass. It drives me nuts.
I'm the same. I cannot...
It gets weeds, even worse weeds than the...
And it's hot, and it's like like putting Glad wrap on the earth.
There's no bugs in it,
No, but you see, some people love that, no bugs. I mean, think about that kind of Italian aesthetic of concreting everything.
Yeah.
So, it's... And that becomes a kind of culturally accepted thing, like lawn. We're about to do our design festival from the 18th to the 25th of October, Fremantle Design Week, and the theme is transition, and it's about looking at those types of, what sort of ideas have we been holding on to that don't really apply anymore? The way we do our gardens and the way that we build our houses. We need to adapt to the new set of circumstances that we find ourselves in now. And of course, that's happened across history. So if you look back through design history, it's fascinating just to see how things evolve and why they evolve. They evolve around external. Look at COVID, that changed so much of the way that we design our world now.
Yeah.
We design to respond to the circumstances of the time.
It's weird as Australians, if we observe the decades of Australians, for me coming into it, and I'm like, early Curtin Uni or something, I'm like, this looks like you got this from Russia, this design. This is like flat concrete, like unassailable walls, and then you go to somewhere like New Murdoch University and, it's flowing and open and planned, it's collaborative, and it's not, it has changed a lot just in 30 years.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And the way that we understand, for me, what I find fascinating at the moment is, in recent history, and certainly in the areas that I work in, there's this emphasis on human-centric design, people-centred design. Well, that's not why are people at the centre of design. What about everything else, all the other living things that really ultimately we can't live without those things. If it was just people-centred design and we got rid of everything else in the world, well, we wouldn't last long, would we?
Yeah, 4 years, they reckon, if the bees go.
Well, that's exactly right. I find that way that language also kind of defines the way we think about things, and that's a perfect example. Human-centred design, well, that's not really right. It hasn't done us very much good justice thus far. When we talk about resources and we think about resources as things that we use and we can have and we can pull out of the ground, there's not that sense. It's where that, I guess, that we are now starting to think about Indigenous cultures and how the way that those cultures think about everything around us is very different. And that really is, if we'd done that all along, we wouldn't be in the hot water that we're in now.
Exactly, yeah, because it's impact. It's just how can you make something blend in with the environment so that it has a minimal impact and maximise the way that environment works.
Yeah, the trees, we need to prioritise the trees. When we buy a block of land, why do we knock all the trees down? Why don't we just build the buildings around the trees? And a lot of that is because of policy. How do we design policy better? How do we design the rules that we use to, control and to live in an organised way? How do we design those, and how do we need to change them? When do we need to change those? The policy design is actually a new category in the Good Design Awards because it is really important and it does impact on the way we do things. And when you want to do something different, often the rules will stop you from doing it, but the rules need to be changed.
You're talking about like council legislation.
Yes, I'm talking about that type of thing, like if you want to build a particular type of house, but, the rules say you can't do it. Well, sometimes, we need those guidelines and those policies and those structures to have an organised society.
Yeah.
But we need to constantly reassess them and see when are they not actually doing us any good anymore, when are they not serving us anymore. And I think with climate change and the climate crisis and all of the other, material scarcity that we're running out of resources, this is why we need to think about those types of things. How do we design for that?
Yeah. And I see every technology pop up every now and then. There was something about hemp in house bricks and how that cuts down your power by like 80% or whatever it's going to be, and it's hard wearing and will last. There seems to be slowly technology creeping in, but it does seem to be taking a long time.
Well, that's a perfect example because often if you want to build a house out of certain types of materials, the building codes will say, well, you can't do it that way because we've got rules that say it has to be this and this, and it stops people from doing things better. So we just went on Saturday to visit a passive house that someone's built in Netherlands, and passive house is a sort of way of building to minimise energy use, and it involves actually making the house airtight. All it means is when the house is shut up on a windy, cold day, the